The first letter came to my chambers on November 18, 2025. It was from the volunteer coordinator at Mercy Ridge Cancer Center, and one sentence in it stayed with me. He is always the last one in the parking lot because he waits until every patient gets into the car. By then I had already sentenced him. I had already made the hardest choice in the case, but that sentence belonged to every part of what happened, and I want to tell you how we got there. On paper, the file looked simple in the worst way. A lab director lost a cancer patient's test results, delayed her treatment, and then let the delay hide behind office language that made it sound ordinary. There was harm. There was fear. There was a person who should have told the truth sooner and did not. I knew all of that before anyone entered my courtroom. I did not yet know the rest. Subscribe. The stories I want to tell are not always about the worst of what I have seen. Sometimes, not often, but sometimes, they are about the moments that made me glad I was in that room. Subscribe for those moments. This is one of them. His name was Daniel Mercer. He was 46 when he stood before me, and the first thing I noticed was not his file or the charge sheet. It was the pale strip of skin on his left wrist where a watch had clearly been for years and was not there anymore. People who have lived by time often show it when time has gone wrong. He carried a thick folder against his ribs and, before we began, moved his attorney's chair slightly so she would have more room at the table. It was a small thing. It told me he still noticed other people. The person harmed by what he did was Elena Ruiz. She was 39, worked as a school secretary, and had 2 sons who were still young enough to count on adults getting things right the first time. She did not walk into that courtroom asking me to break him. She came in wanting something narrower and harder than that. She wanted the truth named, the waiting counted, and some reason to believe the next patient would not be left in the same silence. When she sat down, she placed her notes in front of her and never once looked at them. What happened began on Thursday, March 14, 2024 at 4:12 p.m. on the 6th floor of St. Bridget Medical Plaza in Cedar Glen, inside North Valley Pathology Center. Elena Ruiz had already undergone a biopsy. The tissue was there. The receptor testing and signed addendum were what her oncology team needed before they could lock in treatment. Daniel Mercer was the lab director on duty that evening. There had been a machine calibration problem earlier in the day, 2 technicians were out, and a ceiling leak had forced part of the lab to shift rooms. None of that excused what came next. It only explained the pressure around it. During that room change, Elena's packet was moved into the wrong red hold bin. Daniel realized the next morning that one set of results was overdue. He searched for it. He called staff back in. He checked storage, the cold room, and the outgoing bins. Then he made the decision that put him in front of me. Instead of telling the oncologist's office at once that the packet was missing, he let the status remain pending technical confirmation. For 19 days, Elena Ruiz waited for an answer that did not exist. When he testified, he said, "I thought I could find it before anyone had to hear that I lost it." That sentence mattered to me because it held the whole case in one place. He did search. He also hid behind the search. Elena did not learn the truth until April 2nd, 2024, when her oncologist nurse kept pushing and North Valley admitted the tissue had to be rebiopsied. She lost wages. She paid for child care on short notice. She underwent a second procedure. She waited 19 extra days in the space between fear and information. No ruling I could issue was going to give those days back to her. Before the hearing, what crossed my desk was the indictment, the hospital's internal timeline, a licensing board notice, Elena's victim statement, and the pre-sentence investigation report. That last document matters more than most people know. In plain language, it is what lets me see whether the person in front of me is only the charge or something larger and more complicated than the caption suggests. It gives me work history, debts, treatment needs, caregiving responsibilities, and the shape of a person's life outside one bad decision. The law gave me discretion in this case. I say that plainly because people often think sentencing is all machine and no judgment. It is not. The lawful range here was 12 to 24 months in county custody. I also had authority to suspend some or all of that time if I could explain, on the record, why accountability and public safety were better served another way. Strict application would have been easy. I could have picked a number, spoken it, and ended the matter. Discretion gave me room to ask a harder question. What sentence would tell the truth about the harm and still create the best chance that this man would do useful work in the world after causing it? Subscribe before I keep going. I made a choice in this case that I want to explain fully. Subscribe now, because the reason I made it is coming, and I want you to be here for the whole explanation. From the bench, I watched everyone enter with the kind of open attention I have learned to trust. Daniel came in first with his attorney. His right hand opened and closed twice before he sat. That is the sort of detail you notice from the bench and almost nowhere else. Elena came in 3 minutes later with her husband, Marco Ruiz, and her sister. She moved carefully, not slowly exactly, but with the caution of someone whose body had become a place of appointments and recovery. Daniel stood when she entered. No one told him to. He did not look at me. He looked at the floor between counsel table and the rail and stayed standing until she sat down. The first turn came from a witness who did not mean to provide one. Her name was Teresa Long, the night accession clerk. She was not there to help Daniel. In some ways, his actions had made her own work harder. She spoke in the plain voice of someone who had no interest in drama. She said, "At 1:08 in the morning, I saw him on the floor opening supply boxes by hand, and he said, 'This belongs to a woman who is waiting for me to do my job.'" That was turn one. Not because it cleared him, it did not. Not because it changed the statute, it did not. It changed the way I read the rest of the case. I wrote a note beside her name. He knows there is a person there. A person who has stopped seeing the human being at the other end of a file is harder to reach than a person who still sees her and then makes the worst choice anyway. Both are dangerous. They are not the same. That difference mattered. Elena gave me the next piece of truth. The prosecutor asked what she wanted from the court. Many people in her position ask for the largest number I can lawfully impose, and I do not judge them for it. Elena wrapped both hands around a paper cup and said, "I do not need him broken. I need him useful, and I need somebody to say out loud that those 19 days counted." She did not raise her voice. She did not need to. That sentence landed exactly where it was supposed to. What she wanted was more exact than punishment alone. She wanted the waiting counted as harm. She wanted the silence named. She wanted usefulness from the person who caused it. Courts are not always asked to do that kind of work, but when we are, we should listen carefully. I ordered a full allocution hearing before sentencing. In plain language, that meant I gave both Elena and Daniel the chance to speak directly to me after the evidence and before the sentence. I do that when I think words matter as much as documents. I needed to hear whether Daniel could describe what he had done without hiding behind jargon. He said, "I was sleeping in my office more than I was sleeping at home, and I kept calling that dedication because I did not want to call it collapse." That did not excuse him. It told me the ground beneath the failure. He also said something later that stayed with me for a different reason. He said, "I lost her results, and then I made the harm larger by hiding behind time." That was accountability without fog. No passive voice, no attempt to spread the blame so wide it vanished. He put himself inside the sentence. I needed that. Subscribe if you believe that courts are not only places where people are punished. They are also, sometimes, not always, but sometimes, places where people are met with something more than they expected. Subscribe for those moments. This is one of them. Turn 2 came in a gray binder with black tabs. The defense offered it at sentencing. Inside were volunteer logs, attendance records, draft callback forms, and letters from the Cedar Glen Free Clinic. After North Valley fired Daniel, and after the licensing board suspended him from supervisory lab work, he had begun volunteering there on Saturdays. He was not handling samples. He was not anywhere near diagnostic authority. He was building a double-check callback log for abnormal findings so no patient's result could sit unanswered on one desk without another person being alerted. The value of that binder was not emotional. It was factual. 11 Saturdays, 127 callback entries reviewed, 4 contact lists corrected. A written escalation sheet with boxes for first call, second call, certified letter, physician alert, and welfare referral. The clinic director, Dr. Lila Sen, said, He did not ask us to trust him with anything dangerous. He asked if he could do the careful work that keeps bad news from becoming silence. When she said that, Elena bent the rim of her paper cup under her thumb. That was turn two. It showed me not only who Daniel Mercer had been, but what he might be capable of becoming under strict structure. Mercy without structure is only mood. I do not sentence from moods. But once I had concrete proof that he could turn the exact site of his failure into disciplined service, a different kind of sentence became available to me, not lighter, more exact. The defense, to its credit, did not overreach. Daniel's attorney, Andrea Bell, said, "If I stand here and talk as though survival erased the harm, the court should stop listening to me." I respected that. She was not asking me to pretend Elena's experience had somehow shrunk because treatment did eventually begin. She was asking me to require Daniel to live in direct contact with the kind of waiting he created and to repair systems that allow fear and delay to hide behind procedure. She was right about most of that. She was wrong when she leaned too hard on staffing shortages and corporate pressure. Those facts belonged in the picture, but only in their proper size. A poorly run lab is not the hand that lets a false status remain on a file for 19 days. Daniel made choices. The institution did not relieve him of that. Then he said the sentence I wrote down. He said, "If I am ever trusted with any work again, I want it to be work where nobody has to wait alone for an answer." That was the moment I knew what I was going to do. I wrote it down, not because I needed to remember it, because I wanted to. Subscribe. I am not going to make a speech about it. You are already in this story. Subscribe and let me finish. That sentence told me something he may not even have intended to reveal. Some people under sentence want only distance from the harm. They want the room, the case, and the people in it to disappear. Daniel was asking to be sent toward the exact kind of fear he had caused, not to erase it, not to look noble, but to do work inside it. Courts should pay attention when someone tells the truth that way. A memory from my own life came back to me then, and I had not thought about it in years. I was 17, sitting in my mother's car outside a county clinic while my Aunt Miriam waited for the result of a chest scan. It was late fall. The heater only worked when the car was moving, so the windows kept fogging and clearing as my mother started the engine and turned it off again to save gas. My aunt folded the corner of her appointment card into smaller and smaller triangles and placed it on the dashboard. When the nurse finally called, my mother wrote the time and the next number to call on the back of a grocery receipt because that was all she had. No one said much. We just sat there with the turn signal still clicking though the car was parked. I never said that memory out loud in court. I did not need to. It belonged beside the case. Some memories do not tell you what to do. They tell you what waiting feels like. By sentencing day, I knew the range, 12 to 24 months in county custody. I also knew the law allowed me to suspend that custody and impose strict probation if I made detailed findings. In this case, I chose the lowest end of what the law allowed, but I did not choose the smallest consequence. There is a difference. A fixed jail term can be easier than a long obligation carried in public. Subscribe before I do. I have not told you the full sentence yet. I am about to. Subscribe before I do, because I want to explain every part of it, and the explanation is as important as the ruling itself. Subscribe now. Before I spoke, the room had a specific kind of attention. Elena had one hand around the other wrist. Marco sat with both feet flat. Daniel had stopped moving entirely. His attorney's pen rested across her pad, untouched. I had made this decision carefully. I had made it knowing that mercy, to mean anything, has to be precise. Vague mercy is just hope. Precise mercy is a plan. I had a plan. Turn 3 arrived there, at sentencing, where my compassion had to become structure or mean nothing at all. I imposed a 12-month county sentence on the felony count and suspended execution of that custody in full. In its place, I ordered 36 months of supervised probation with special conditions. I said that plainly because I wanted everyone in that room to understand what I was doing. Jail had been available. I was choosing a more demanding form of accountability because the evidence supported it. I said, I am ordering you to pay restitution in the amount of $8,640 to Elena Ruiz within 18 months. Then I explained why. That figure came from the repeat biopsy bill, mileage, childcare receipts, and lost wages. I said money does not return 19 days. It can at least keep her from paying for your dishonesty with her household income. I said, I am also ordering 1,000 hours of supervised restorative service with the Jefferson County Cancer Access Network. I made the limits plain. No diagnostic testing, no records authority, no supervisory role. His work was to be patient transport coordination, callback audit support, appointment reminder systems, and logistics. I said I was ordering that because the harm here was not only medical. It was the experience of waiting alone inside uncertainty. I wanted his labor aimed directly at reducing that experience for others. Then I said, and there is one more thing. I ordered him to complete 200 hours of certified coursework in medical ethics, records integrity, and disclosure duties. I ordered weekly counseling for 6 months, then further treatment as directed, focused on burnout, avoidance, and truth under pressure. I ordered him to maintain full-time lawful work or education and provide monthly proof to probation. I barred him from any supervisory role in a medical laboratory or records department unless this court later approved it after notice to probation and the licensing board. I said secrecy grows best in exhaustion and isolation. Structure interrupts that. I added a relational condition. 2 evenings each month for the first year, he was to serve with the Mercy Ridge Patient Family Support Program, not as a speaker unless invited, but as a worker, setting chairs, carrying trays, driving routes when cleared, cleaning up after. I wanted his life reconnected to people who were living in the kind of fear his silence had worsened. Then I gave him a benchmark. If, after 18 months, he had paid restitution in full, completed at least 600 service hours, finished the ethics work, remained violation-free, and received a positive report from probation and the service agencies, I would entertain a motion for early termination of probation by 12 months. That was my way of saying something from the bench that the rules do not always let us say directly. A future can be earned in steps. Then I spoke to him as a person. I said, what you did delayed care for a woman already carrying a cancer diagnosis. It cost her 19 days of certainty, another invasive procedure, money from her home, and trust she had every right to place in the people handling her care. I turned to Elena and said, Mrs. Ruiz, the court records your waiting as harm. It mattered. It counts here. Then I looked back at Daniel and said, the charges against you describe your conduct, but they do not contain the whole of you. And after that I said the sentence I meant fully, I believe you can do this. I ended with one more line. I said, Mr. Mercer, do not make this court come looking for the man you were when you were afraid. Stay busy becoming the man you have already shown me you can be. That was where I stopped. The first reaction I noticed came from Marco Ruiz. He did not smile. He placed his hand over Elena's knuckles across the rail, and she let it stay there. Thank you for staying with this story. It is not the kind of story people usually tell about courtrooms. Subscribe if it is the kind of story you want more of. I have more to tell. As the room began to empty, I remained on the bench while the clerk gathered the signed orders. Elena stood before Daniel did. She took 2 steps toward the aisle, paused, and turned back just enough to say, make sure the next call gets made. He said, I will. That was all. Nobody reached for more. Before I stood up, I put my pen back into the inside pocket of my robe and squared the stack of exhibits with both hands. I have done that thousands of times. That day it felt different, small, ordinary, enough. The one later fact I carry most closely happened on October 7, 2025. I know the date because it was in a compliance packet sent to Chambers after a review hearing. Included in it was the letter from Mercy Ridge Cancer Center. The volunteer coordinator wrote that Daniel Mercer had become the person who stayed in the parking lot until every patient assigned to the evening ride program was safely inside a car. Route logs were attached. 23 patients transported that month, 4 who needed help walking, 1 who cried in the front seat until they reached her husband by phone. Daniel stayed for all of it. There was no appeal. Neither side filed one. That mattered to me more than I expected. It told me the sentence had been heard from both directions as something serious enough to stand. Here is what I came to believe because of that case. Mercy is hardest when it must be designed. It would have been easier to choose custody, announce a number, and let the jail take over. Numbers are clean. Human repair is not. What this case required of me was attention. I had to separate excuse from context, performance from remorse, and hope from evidence. I had to let the victim tell me what she actually needed. I had to accept that a sentence can be demanding without being only destructive. What the case gave back to me as a person was my respect for careful work. If you have been where Daniel Mercer stood and you are carrying the question of whether there is a path forward after causing real harm, I can tell you one thing I look for from the bench: specificity. Can you name what you did, who it cost, and what part of you made it possible without reaching for fog? If you can, then you have something to build on. Use that. Courts can do more with truth than with performance. And if you have been where Elena Ruiz stood, with people around you trying to turn your pain into an argument about mercy, I am not going to tell you what to want. I can only tell you what I have seen. Over time, when victims chose a measured kind of mercy, they did not seem smaller to me. They seemed less tied to the person who hurt them. That is an observation, not an instruction. You do not owe anyone that road. After one later review hearing, a short note came through the proper channel from Elena. One sentence in it has stayed with me. She said, "What helped me was not that he suffered. It was that the court made him face the waiting." I believed her. Subscribe. That letter from Mercy Ridge is the reason I told this story. If you want more stories like this one, stay here for them. I care most about what happens after the sentence, when a person either does the work or does not. I still think about the image I opened with: a parking lot after dusk, the last ride not yet gone, a man standing there until every patient is inside a car. Nothing grand about it, just the end of waiting, one person at a time. That is why I told you this story. If you want to hear the others, and there are others, subscribe. That is all I am asking. Subscribe and stay. And if you leave a comment, leave it like you are entering a room where justice and humanity are allowed to speak to each other without raising their voices.